us, Father Deacon Nicholas Newman, who is newly ordained to the diaconate. And I'm going to let him get us started. So if you would, please introduce yourself and tell us about what you are teaching with St. Raphael School.
Thank you very much. Well, like you said, I'm newly ordained just about a month now, so still sort of trying to settle into that a little bit. But I'm looking forward to teaching for St. Raphael's this year. I'm going to be teaching 2 courses, Ancient Greek for the 6th graders and a course on Tolkien from an Orthodox perspective. So both things that are very dear to my heart. So I'm teaching Greek because I actually had the pleasure of doing a Ph.D. in classics at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. So that's one of my great passions. And of course, you can't do classics without reading a little bit of Tolkien. So it was perhaps, I think, one of the greatest classicists of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I'm looking forward to that very much this coming school year.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we really should be calling you Father Deacon Doctor, right?
I think it's cumbersome.
That's a little cumbersome. All right, well, tell us, and I think you've started to answer this already, but it's a great question for all of us to ponder as instructors. So why do you teach? Why do you teach Greek and classics? Why do you teach Tolkien? What drives you?
Well, I think to start with classics, learning the classics, learning ancient Greek and Latin is very different from learning a modern language. Even though there's some movements today, like the spoken Latin movement and so forth, that do an excellent job in teaching fluency. Learning Latin, learning Greek, learning Hebrew is very different from learning a modern language because you're not learning it to make output. Right? If you're learning Spanish or French, for example, or German, you are learning it in order to be able to speak to someone else. So you're learning to be able to make yourself heard, to speak to someone. But if you're learning classics, a classical language, most of those people are long dead. So there's not going to be too much conversation happening. Mm-hmm. So why are we learning it? We're learning it to listen. And I think that is very, very important skill for us to have both in our academic life, to be able to listen, to be able to read, to understand, to interpret, without adding our own ideologies, our own understandings into it, just to sit and to listen to the great thinkers of antiquity, of the Middle Ages. But it's also important, I think, spiritually, because we can apply some of that listening then to our own prayer life, for example, so that our prayers don't end up sounding like a Christmas list, but we add time in for us to listen to God's answers. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the big driving factors for me in teaching and continuing to learn about ancient Greece, about ancient Rome, and so forth, is that training in listening. That's so important for us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I feel like I want to add something or ask something, but I was sort of just loving to listen, actually, to what you were saying. There's so much value in that for all of us as learners and as instructors, I think. So the next question, I think, might be the hardest of our 5 questions, but maybe not. I think it's hard for all of us who love to read and to learn. What book has been formative to who you are?
The Silmarillion by Tolkien, in many ways. For a number of reasons. I mean, in part because it is this beautiful tapestry of different types of stories that are all brought together into a whole. And of course, it's fantasy. It's not necessarily reality, but it reflects reality in the sense that Tolkien is subcreating. So he is using his being created in the image and likeness of God to create something of his own. And in it, we can see sort of his love for God and his understanding of that. And it I think is a good example for everyone to do that as well. Not necessarily in literary creation, but in everything we do, we are supposed to be sub-creators. We are stewards of God's creation and are supposed to create something ourselves. Almost in the sense like if I mean we see that in the church too. If we're bringing prosphora to the church for the Eucharist, right? What have we done? We've taken lots of things that God has given us. We've taken wheat, we've taken salt, we've taken water, and we've taken yeast. But if we put them on the table next to each other, they never actually become bread. It takes human agency to create the bread and then offer that to God and then have it given back to us.
Yeah.
So we have to sub-create, and I think the Silmarillion really is sort of a paragon of that ability of humanity to sub-create.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. I was actually just speaking to someone else about that too, how much, it's God's gift to us that we get to participate in his creation. We get to be creators ourselves, right? We can create, we can write and be creators, and that way we can paint, we can be iconographers, potters, and we're sort of participating in the divine in that. That's has interestingly been a theme of several of these interviews. For those of people who watch these, they may notice that it comes up again and again. I think that's such a beautiful gift that God gave us. So I have to ask a follow-up to that one. So we'll have more than 5 questions. So I believe, if I remember the reading list, that students in the Tolkien class will be reading at least excerpts from the Silmarillion with you.
At least
correct?
excerpts. The Silmarillion is a rather lengthy work, and there's so much in there that we wouldn't be able to cover everything of the Silmarillion in a year and then still have time to look at The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and other texts, Leaf by Nigel and so forth. But we'll be looking at some of the major episodes in the Silmarillion. For example, the story of Beren, the story of Turin, the story of the fall of Gondolin. So some of the major episodes, the sort of the formative things in there. Partially literarily, because you see a lot of intertext that Tolkien is using in some of those. For example, and if you look at the story of Turin, there's a great deal of intertext with the story of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer and so forth, and with the Kalevala of Finnish mythology and so forth. But also because there's a lot of Tolkien in it. Of course, he and his wife were, in a sense, Beren and Luthien, so you get to see a lot of him in some of those stories.
Beautiful. Well, you're kind of piquing my interest. I may have to come sit in on a class at some point. So, so much of my academic work has been in Slavic literature that it's actually been years since I've revisited Tolkien. So many years. So how about this next question? What has been one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen?
That was the most difficult question, I think, that all of them. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen. That was one that I struggled with a great deal. But so I'm from Zurich in Switzerland, and there's a church in Zurich called the Großmünster, which was originally a Romanesque cathedral. But when Zwingli kind of took the lead of the religious life in the city and during the Reformation, they covered over all of the Romanesque frescoes and everything. They took all of the religious artwork out and threw it into the river. And when I was still little, when we would go visit the church, everything was still whitewashed, so all the walls were whitewashed and so forth. And then at one point, when must have been in my teens or something, they uncovered one of the frescoes on this random pillar in the middle of the church, and it was a beautiful icon of the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos holding Christ. And I think that really struck me. That was I think that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Absolutely. Wow, what a joy and what a surprise. Wonderful. So how about this? The last formal question. what goodness could someone expect from your course?
Well, any goodness in spite of me, presumably, but in looking at ancient Greek, of course, you have what I was talking about earlier, the ability to start listening and the necessity of listening. That is kind of the beginning steps towards the good, the true, and the beautiful, because that the good, the true, and the beautiful flows from God, and in order to appreciate it, in order to look at it, you have to listen. You can't always be noisy. So that's one, I think, one good. And of course, in Tolkien, he appreciated the good, the true, and the beautiful greatly. And we're going to see a lot of description of the natural world in Tolkien's writings, and we'll be able to appreciate the ability of the human being to take the beauty of God's creation and imbue it into their own creation. So in all of this, to move towards the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Wonderful. Well, I think you're going to fit in so wonderfully with our faculty. We often call ourselves that we're a faculty of friends, a community united in Christ, and we're really looking forward to having you join us this year. Is there anything else you want to share with our community, since you have a few minutes of a platform?
Just if you like Tolkien, please join us. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to have some creative projects as well as academic projects, so you'll get a chance to do some of your own sub-creation of a sub-creation, perhaps. So I don't know in division how far that gets you, but we'll have it'll be hopefully a wonderful class, and I look forward to seeing the students and working together with them.
Absolutely. I hope lots of people will join us, and I will have to peek in and learn a little bit myself. I think I have some reading cut out from me to get caught up again. So I will openly confess that throughout my childhood, my own father talked about the Silmarillion all the time, but I don't think I've actually read it all the way through. So at some point, maybe that's something I need to myself go back and do.
The only difficulty is all the names. So maybe keep. The first time I read it, I kept like a little journal of all the names that came up and who they are and what other names they have and so forth.
So I will say, people say the same thing about Russian literature, which is more of my expertise, that they get lost in the names. So maybe it won't feel strange to me. I don't know. We'll see. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, remember that Father Deacon Nicholas will be teaching Greek with us next year, and also Tolkien, and we hope to have many of you join us. And thank you again.
Thank you.